I'm J.R. Church. Welcome to today's analysis of the news. Well, according to Reuters news agency, a think tank in Washington, D.C. has suggested that scientists have underestimated the potential for a giant earthquake and tsunami that could swamp much of the United States Northwest and Canadian West coasts. Geological evidence suggests that there have been earthquakes in the past and that they were even stronger than a magnitude of 9.2, the second biggest quake ever recorded, which caused a 42-foot high tsunami to hit the Gulf of Alaska in 1964. They said, quote, "Our data indicates that two major earthquakes have struck Alaska in the last 1,500 years. And our findings show that a bigger earthquake and a more destructive tsunami than the 1964 event are possible in the future." Of course, it took 1,500 years for the last big one, and 900 years ago there was a similar one. How far in the future are they looking anyway? No one knows. The region has been hit by large single-event earthquakes and tsunamis before, and our evidence indicates that multiple and more extensive ruptures can happen. Subsoil samples and sediments from the Alaskan coast found evidence of major disasters 900 years ago and 1,500 years ago. Tsunami warning systems have been installed along our western coast and around Hawaii, and experts are working to improve them since a quake off of Indonesia in 2004 caused a monster tsunami that killed 230,000 people and devastated coastlines from Thailand to Sri Lanka. So, when the Bible says there'll be earthquakes in diverse places, it and other earthquakes have gotten the attention of those who study earthquakes in the United States and Great Britain. And this concerning earthquakes from Breitbart.com says that a massive 7.8 magnitude earthquake last week hit the coast of New Zealand and actually pushed it a foot closer to Australia. Must have been a pretty big earthquake. But earthquake scientist Ken Gladhill of GNS Science said that the shift illustrated the huge force of the tremor, the biggest in the world so far this year. Basically, he said, New Zealand just got a little bit bigger. And that's another way to think about it. He said even though the landmass moved a foot closer to Australia, the other end didn't. It only moved 1 inch. So the country's, I guess, 11 inches longer than before. The biggest quake in New Zealand in 78 years caused only slight damage to building and properties when it struck the remote southwest Fiordland region on the South Island last Thursday. It says for a very large earthquake, although it was widely felt, there were a few areas that were severely shaken. New Zealand frequently suffers earthquakes because it marks the meeting point of the Australian and Pacific continental plates, the tectonic plates. The latest quake was the biggest since February 2nd, 1931, when another 7.8 quake killed 256 people on the North Island of Napier. The biggest quake recorded here measured 8.2 and caused major damage in 1855 in the fledgling European settlement that later became its capital of Wellington. Well, earthquakes continue to happen. Amazing. Russia builds a key naval headquarters in Syria, and this is a worry to Israel. This comes from RaidersNewsNetwork.com. A high-ranking Russian naval source reported July 21st that the Soviet-era naval maintenance base near Tartus in Syria is to be expanded and modernized to become fully operational. Israeli military sources report that Russia is building the facility up as its main sea base for operation in 4 bodies of water, the Atlantic and Indian Oceans, and the Mediterranean and Red Seas. The upgrade of Russian port facilities at Tartus, its only foothold in the Mediterranean, will automatically enhance Moscow's strategic interests in Syria and Bashar Assad's regime. The Russian source said that the 50 naval personnel and 3 berthing floats currently deployed at Tartus, with accommodation for up to a dozen warships, will be beefed up with a new berthing float delivered by 2 tugboats from the Black Sea Fleet. Debka Files sources in Israel disclosed that those warships include large vessels such as the nuclear-armed guided missile cruiser Peter the Great and an aircraft carrier Admiral Kuznetsov, which called in at Tartus in January. So, Russia has a strategic interest now in Syria, namely its naval base on the Mediterranean coast. So, it seems like a bit of a conflict of interest for Russia to try to negotiate a peace deal between Israel and its neighbors. But according to the Jerusalem Post, Russia hopes to begin holding preparatory talks in the next few months with key regional and international players to determine the parameters of a Middle East peace conference it hopes to hold in Moscow. Russia's special Middle East envoy, Alexander Saltynov, told the Jerusalem Post this on Wednesday. This conference, said Saltynov, who has been in Israel since Monday evening as part of a regional tour that took him to Syria, Jordan, and the Palestinian Authority, needed to be prepared thoroughly, properly, and with an elaborate agenda, with the determination of participants, and with at least a prognosis of what the results will be. The conference, which has been discussed since the Annapolis Conference in 2007, would deal not only with the Israeli-Palestinians peace, shall we say, talks, but also with talks between Israel and Syria and between Israel and Lebanon, as well as regional economic issues. So Russia is going to try to strike a deal between Israel and its neighbors. Saltynov said this forum was needed to help restore or make a new impetus for the resumption of negotiations on all tracks. Saltynov said the Middle East was one of the topics discussed with President Obama in his recent visit to Moscow. Regarding the possibility of renewing Israeli-Syrian diplomatic talks, Saltynov said that he was told in Damascus that Syria was ready to renew talks with Israel. Quote, but it would be clear that one of the main topics of the negotiation would be the Golan Heights issue.